Well, good morning, church. Welcome. So glad you've tuned in this week. With all the things that we've got going on in our world, from pandemic-related issues, inflation prices, the heat, the rain, the flooding, the world is in a turmoil. Generally, it always is. Sometimes it's in other parts of the world, but today and for the last little while we've been dealing with a lot. So I am glad that you've tuned in. Hopefully we can give you some encouragement and also remind ourselves to who we put our faith in and who we trust as we live this life. So sit back. We will have some singing, a lesson, and time around the table. I'll see you in a second.
All hail the power of Jesus' name, let angels prostrate fall. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Ye chosen seed of Israel's race, he ransomed from the fall. Hail him who saves you by his grace, and crown him Lord of all. Hail him who saves you by his grace, and crown him Lord of all. Oh, that with yonder sacred throne we at his feet may fall. We'll join the everlasting song and praise him, Lord of all. We'll join the everlasting song and praise him, Lord of all.
Well, good morning, church. Welcome. A couple weeks ago, I started a series on responsibility. And the question is, are we taking responsibilities for our lives? And the reason for our discussion is that everyone thinks they do, but are we really? Irresponsibility is difficult to see in ourselves because we are pretty good at making excuses or laying blame at someone or others for the things that they bring up as, well, you're being irresponsible. And the impact of irresponsibility not only impacts our lives, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, but the lives of others. And blame is always a signal to us of a responsibility issue that we're, trying to give ourselves a pass on. Do you remember the first time you said that isn't fair? The truth is, life isn't fair. And sometimes when your piece of the pie is smaller, and other times your piece of the pie is the largest, whether it's related to responsibility or blame. The truth is that life is not only not fair, but it isn't equal either. Something in us wants everything to be equal among ourselves, among everybody. And I believe the reason we want this is it makes it easier for us to compare our lives to someone else so that we can periodically take a look at us and give ourselves an attaboy. But the problem is It's not equal. Life is not fair. And it's not like God failed, but God chose to create a system, if you will, where people would work with what they had. And we would be responsible for what we had. Maybe we think sometimes that it makes me less responsible or accountable to others because life isn't equal. And it's easy to think that way. But you would be wrong. We are all responsible for our own talents and starting points of our own lives. The issue is not how to make life fair, but what we do with what we have been given. That's what we are responsible for. And we have several stories in the Bible, but I'm primarily going to be looking at Matthew chapter 25. We know it as the parable of the talents. I'm going to read it, and then we'll discuss it. Again, in verse 14, again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came, and Master, he said, I know that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. And whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. We all know some 5-bag people. It seems their life just goes perfectly, doesn't it? They've got all the talent, all the money, all the abilities, and it seems like it always worked for them. And then we also know some 2 and 1 bag people. Maybe we're one of them, part of them. We know that their lives a lot harder, maybe extremely difficult. But then there are people who had to really work their way through school and whose parents divorced when they were young and who weren't all that attractive, who don't have the good communication skills. Life is really tough for them. And then there's most of us, somewhere in the middle. And the question for us is this: what are we going to do with what we have? I grew up with someone whose talents were not a lot, but he worked harder than most. I think of him often and still yet talk to him periodically. I, for whatever reason, had some talents. I had some abilities athletically, and I was reasonably intelligent in school, got good grades, and hardly studied. I didn't work and manage my talents. But my friend, who didn't have all the athletic skills that I had been given, and who wasn't quite as good of a student as I was, had to work harder. I remember I helped him a lot in his various studies, and I would always see him working out and training to be better athletically. We both went off to college together, and he did well in college, did well in school. He worked so hard with what he had, and the results that he received were huge. He took what he had and worked it, and worked hard. I didn't. In that period of time of my life, I didn't. I took what I'd given as took advantage of it. I just didn't put the effort into the skills that God had given me and wasted them. Most people have a mix of plenty and a lack in other things. They are still called to look at what they've been given and figure out how to be responsible with it for all it's worth. All of us have various talents and various skills, and we start off at various different places, but wherever we start and whatever we've been blessed with, we're responsible to use it to the best of our ability. That's what we're responsible for. And we need to work as if responsibility to God really matters to us. We have our story where these men all received various talents based on what God considered their ability to be. He didn't judge unfairly. He just judged based on what their abilities had already been given to them. And we're all in that same field, if you will. I love to relate a lot of things to sports. In a basketball game, there's going to be a guy who can dribble the ball real well and somebody who can jump real high. There's going to be one guy who can shoot from long distance. There's one who struggles with a layup, but he can rebound the ball better than most. On a football team, there's 11 players on each side or out on the field, but there's actually very many different players. There's punters, kickers, receivers, linemen who block, quarterbacks who lead, running backs who are fast, receivers who catch. There's always a variation of people working in harmony with different abilities, different skills, which create. Kind of reminded of Paul's illustration as the church as being a body. Not everybody is going to be a hand. Some people are going to be feet. Some people are going to be back. Some people are going to be the eyes. Some people are going to be the ears. We all function together in concert with one another. And in our story, what happens next after the master goes out of town, we have where he comes back in, and we have this illustration of first century whining. Listen closely, because as the third servant begins to explain why he buried his money, he blames the master. That is, remember, blame is generally what irresponsible people will do, or in the level of irresponsibility, it's what happens. You blame. He said to him, then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. Oh my. The servant is saying this, that the master's too tough to work for. He's not only tough to work for, he's not even fair and honest. He steals from people. And he's intimidated by the master. But the problem is that true of the master that he's talking about? The illustration Jesus has given him? No. God does not take from what doesn't belong to him. And he doesn't harvest from where he never scattered seed. So the servant says, he was anxious. So he says, I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. The servant is basically blaming his master for there not being any more gold. The master's reply is quite tough, is it not? You wicked, lazy servant. Wicked. You know, wicked can be translated worthless. And I think that's a better translation. The servant didn't invest the money because he was lazy. He just did the easiest thing and then blamed his master for his own slothfulness. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit. Here's another surprise in this parable. The master says to his other servants, take the bags of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For those who have will be given more, and those will have they will have an abundance. And for those who do not have, even what they have will be taken away. For those who've been responsible for what they have, they will be given more. So this guy had this incredible opportunity to realize, yet he blew it. Blames his boss and is thrown out where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, a place of anger and frustration. And the parable's over. Jesus' point is this. Everyone gets an uneven amount of opportunity, and everybody gets held accountable for what they do with it. Everyone has the privilege and everyone has the responsibility to somehow, someday give an account for what they did with their uneven amount of opportunity. And this uneven amount of opportunity isn't even ours. It's on loan to us. Our responsibility is to figure out how to maximize what we are given to God's glory. To use what has been given to us the best we can. See, one day you and I will give that account for our life, for what we were responsible for. And you and I will have to give an account for our entire lives. We will have at some time, we all have some time, but we have uneven amounts of time. We all have opportunities, but we have uneven, unfair amounts of opportunity. But the bottom line is this. To whom something is given, regardless how great or how small, something is required. It is when we embrace it through the lens of a God who loves us, we begin to be serious about taking full responsibility for our lives. Everyone will give that account for what they have been blessed with and what talent they have been given. So let's not look at one another and say, oh, they got all the breaks. Take what God gave you and be responsible to Him for the gift you were given. God bless. I'll see you in a few minutes as we surround the table.
Wonderful grace of Jesus, greater than all my sin. How shall my tongue describe it? Where shall His praise begin? Taking away my burden, setting my spirit free, for the wonderful grace of matchless grace of Jesus, deeper than the mighty rolling sea, higher than the mountains, sparkling like a fountain, all sufficient grace for even me, broader than the scope of my transgression, sing it greater far than all my sin and shame, Oh, magnify the precious name of Jesus, praise His name. Wonderful grace of Jesus, reaching the most defiled, by its transforming power, making him God's dear child, purchasing peace and heaven for all eternity, and the wonderful grace of Jesus reaches me. Wonderful the matchless grace of Jesus, deeper than the mighty rolling sea, higher than the mountains, sparkling like a fountain, all sufficient grace for even me, broader than the scope of my transgression, sing it greater far than all my sin and shame, Oh, magnify the precious name of Jesus, praise His name.
Oftentimes I think about Jesus and what He did during that week and that life that He lived, as He took responsibility for the things that God had laid before Him. The fact that He was going to suffer a life that wasn't fair. Jesus did nothing wrong, and yet was treated the most unfair because He had lived the perfect life. He had been totally responsible with everything that God had given Him. In fact, in John, He says to His disciples, everything my Father has told me to do, I've done. He was totally and completely responsible, but yet suffered unfair treatment and was condemned unjustly. I think sometimes we need to rethink how we judge unequal and unfair. Because if we want everything to be fair, then we will get what we deserve. God's grace will not be made available to us because you can't give unless it's all fair. But thanks be to God that God is smarter than we are and sees the fact that things need to be done the way they're being done so that He can give grace to those who take His grace. So here we surround this table to remind ourselves that what Jesus took was totally unfair and unjust. But because of His gift, we get His grace. So let's take this bread and take this cup and remember how much we've been given. Would you bow with me, please? Our Father which art in heaven, we approach your throne of grace and mercy, Father. Reminded of how truly blessed we are, how much you have bestowed upon us, what gifts and treasures you have laid at our feet. And Father, as we partake of this bread and we partake of this cup, may it remind us and may we always remember what has been given to us. And may we be responsible with the life and the grace that's been given to us. Bless us as we partake of this bread and this cup. Through the power of the resurrected Son do we pray. And amen. God bless. I look forward to seeing you again next week, and have a great week.